She appeared one quiet evening on the corner of a busy street, an alien girl with eyes that glowed faintly, as if holding a secret promise. People who passed by did not know what to make of her. At first some thought she was lost, some thought she was waiting for someone else, but she was there with a purpose that no one could see. Her figure was slender. Her skin carried a pale shimmer beneath the city lamps, and her hair flowed with a strange sheen that caught the attention of strangers. Yet no one dared to ask too many questions. The corner where she stood was not special, at least not to the humans who walked by it. Every day it was only a cracked sidewalk near an old lamppost beside a shop that sold bread and coffee, and behind her a wall marked with faded paint and scratches. But to her it was more than a simple spot. It was the last place she had stood with the human who had looked at her with kindness in his eyes, and whispered that he would return to her one day. At first she thought the promise would be fulfilled quickly, perhaps within days or weeks, so she remained standing, quietly waiting for his shape to appear again. Through the crowd she watched every face. Closely she listened to the steps on the pavement. She followed the shadows stretching under the evening light, hoping that each one belonged to him. But the days kept passing. Her presence began to draw curiosity. Merchants noticed her stillness. Workers passing to and from the city center noticed her unchanging place. Even the stray cats circled her feet as if sensing her unusual calm. She never asked for food, never asked for shelter, never asked for help. She only stood as though anchored to that exact corner with an invisible chain. One woman, carrying groceries, stopped one day and asked her softly if she was waiting for someone. The alien girl simply nodded once with her glowing eyes and said yes. "I wait for the one who promised to return." The woman frowned, unsure what to say, and walked away, but she remembered those words and whispered them to her neighbors, and from their whispers spread as days stretched further. Her figure became a part of the street itself, like the lamppost or the shop door. People began to expect her presence. They measured time by her silence. They grew familiar with the sight of her hands folded in front of her body, her posture steady, her gaze fixed forward as though she could see through the crowd. Into the future the alien girl never wavered, not even when the weather grew cold, not even when rain fell heavily, not even when winds tore at her clothes. She did not shiver, she did not bend. Her body remained like a statue, yet her eyes continued to burn with quiet light, a light that suggested waiting was not suffering but devotion, and that devotion itself was stronger than hunger or fatigue. The city had seen many strange things, but nothing like this. A girl from another world, waiting at the same corner night after night, while no one knew if the human she waited for was alive or gone. No one knew why she believed in the promise so deeply, but in her stillness there was a truth that words could not explain. She told a passing child that a human once promised to return to her at this very spot, and since then she refused to leave. The child had stopped near the corner, his eyes wide and filled with curiosity. He had tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered about this strange glowing girl. His mother tried to pull him away, but the child lingered and asked, "Why are you here? Why do you stand so still?" The alien girl bent slightly, her glowing eyes soft as she answered, "I wait for someone who promised me he would come back." The child was too young to understand the weight of promises, yet he remembered her words, and he repeated them to his friends at school. Soon the story spread among children. They would gather in small groups across the street, staring at her and whispering theories. Some thought she was a ghost, others thought she was a statue come alive, and a few believed she really was from another world waiting for someone special. Adults noticed too. Though most tried to ignore her presence, they could not help but feel unsettled by her unwavering stillness. One shopkeeper, who owned the bakery beside her, offered her bread once. She accepted it politely, bowing her head, but then placed it on the ground, untouched, as if food did not matter, as if time itself was her only nourishment. Her devotion unnerved the shopkeeper, who decided never to offer again. Yet he told his customers that the alien girl was waiting for someone who would never come, and this only added fuel to the whispers. The city was busy and loud, cars passing constantly, people rushing to jobs, lovers meeting on corners, friends laughing after long days. Yet no matter how much noise filled the air, the alien girl remained silent. Her silence created a contrast so sharp that many began to notice her more than the chaos around them. She became a reminder that amidst endless movement, someone could still stand still. Some nights she drew more attention than usual when neon lights reflected in her pale skin, and her eyes glowed brighter than the street lamps. Passers-by slowed their steps, drawn unconsciously toward her presence. But when they came close, they found no conversation, only her patient stance and her quiet Watching it was as though she existed on a line between worlds. Both present and distant children sometimes dared to speak to her again, asking when will he come, and she would reply with the same calm voice, he promised he will return, and I believe him. Her words puzzled them, for how could anyone wait so long for someone who might never appear? Yet in her tone there was no doubt, no hesitation, no sadness, only belief so steady it felt unshakable. Sea's end began to turn, leaves fell, then snow covered the street and melted into streams beneath the sun, and still she stood there, her figure unchanging, her devotion becoming less a curiosity and more a legend among the people. They began telling her story to visitors, pointing to her corner as if it was a landmark. Some said she was foolish, others said she was holy, but all agreed she was unforgettable. The child who first asked her a question grew taller with time, and each time he passed the corner, he saw her again, never moved, never altered, still waiting for the human who had promised her something that only she seemed to believe. And with every passing day the mystery deepened. The city lights reflected in her gaze, night after night, as she stood motionless, watching every shadow and every face with unshaken patience. She became like a living mirror of the city itself, absorbing its movements, its noise, its color, while remaining untouched by all of it. Each evening when the sun sank and the neon lamps flickered to life, her pale figure glowed faintly, as though she belonged more to the lights than to the earth. People crossing the street could see her eyes shining through the glass windows of buses, through the headlights of cars, and even through the haze of smoke that rose from food stalls. Her presence was constant, as if she had been written into the design of the city. Some who passed her daily began to recognize her. They stopped thinking of her as strange and started to feel she was part of the rhythm of their routines. One woman who worked late nights always saw her in the same place, and she would nod silently as she walked past the alien girl, never nodded back, but the woman swore she felt acknowledged. She began to rely on that silent exchange to get her through the exhaustion of her long shifts. The alien girl watched every face that passed. She studied them with the sharpness of someone waiting for one specific person to emerge from the blur of humanity. Whenever someone resembled him in posture or voice, she leaned forward slightly, her glowing eyes widening with hope, but always the resemblance faded into disappointment. Yet she did not break her stillness. Her body only stiffened, then softened again, as if she had rehearsed disappointment and accepted it as part of the ritual of waiting. At night the street grew quiet, only the hum of lamps and the faint rumble of distant traffic filled the air. Yet she did not leave. She stood through the hours of darkness, her gaze sweeping over the emptiness as though she could still see crowds passing by. Her patience was not just for the human who promised her, it was for time itself. She seemed to treat time as an ally, not an enemy. Some passers-by began to say that her eyes carried something more than waiting. They claimed they saw reflections of stars in her gaze, even when the sky above was clouded. They said that when she looked at them, they felt as though she was looking through them into another place, beyond the city, perhaps even into another world. One drunk man once shouted at her, asking who she really was and why she wasted her days. She did not answer him. She only kept staring forward, and her silence silenced him. To her, posture became so familiar that artists began to sketch. Her musicians wrote small songs about her, and poets scribbled lines comparing her patience to eternal rivers. One artist painted her beneath the streetlight, calling the work devotion incarnate, and soon the painting hung in a local cafe where people sipped coffee and whispered about her story. Through all of this attention, she never changed. She did not seek fame. She did not turn to address the crowds. Her waiting was hers alone, untouched by what others said or believed. The corner was sacred to her because it was the place of a promise, and nothing anyone did could weaken her belief in that one truth. When rain poured, she let it fall across her shoulders. When snow came, she stood frozen, yet her figure never wavered. She did not move to seek shelter. She did not raise her hands to shield her face. She simply allowed the sky to do as it pleased, as though storms and cold were nothing compared to the promise she carried in her heart. The corner became her world, and the lamppost became her companion, shining weakly beside her through endless nights. During the first storm that battered the city with heavy rain, many believed she would finally leave. They watched through windows as the streets filled with water, as umbrellas flipped in the wind, and people ran for cover. Yet when the storm passed the next morning, there she was standing, soaked to the bone, her clothes clinging to her frame, her hair plastered across her glowing face, but her eyes still fixed ahead. Untouched by despair, the sight startled those who saw her because they realized nothing could drive her away. Winter came next, and snow layered the ground in thick blankets. The shopkeeper by the bakery shook his head each day, as he saw her covered in white, yet refusing to move. He once placed a blanket near her feet. She looked at it for a long time but never used it. She did not seem to feel the cold. Her body remained still, her breath barely visible in the icy air. She was like a statue carved from another world, and the more people saw her endure, the more they began to whisper that she was not waiting for a man at all, but perhaps for something divine. Children pressed their faces to frosted windows, pointing at her shape blurred in the snow. They would ask their parents, "Why does she not go home?" And the parents could not answer, because no one knew. If she even had a home, she belonged only to the corner, and to the memory of the human who had spoken to her. Spring arrived at last and melted the snow. The city grew bright again. Flowers pushed up from cracks in the pavement, but she remained unchanged. Even as the world around her renewed itself, she looked neither tired nor relieved. She looked only patient, her glow softer beneath the warmth of the new season, yet steady as ever. Her constancy unsettled some and inspired others. In summer heat pressed heavily upon the city's sweat-drenched workers' clothes, and tempers grew short, but the alien girl stood tall with no sign of discomfort. Her strange resilience became the talk of neighbors, who began to see her as a legend unfolding before their eyes. They debated her purpose. They invented stories about her past. They told travelers to stop by the corner and witness the miracle of the girl who never left. Through every storm, every flake of snow, every beam of sun, she remained unbroken, her figure silent, her eyes alive, her waiting stronger than nature itself. And though seasons turned like pages in a book, she remained fixed on a single line. The return of the one who promised her. Whispers spread through the streets about the strange girl, who never moved. Some feared her, some admired her, many pitied her. The story of the alien girl traveled faster than footsteps. People told it in shops, on buses, in markets, and even in schools. She became a subject of gossip, of wonder, of unease. No one understood why she stayed, and no one could explain her glowing eyes, yet all agreed that she was always there. Rumors began to multiply like branches of a tree. One story said she was cursed and could not leave the corner until the one who bound her returned. Another story said she was a spirit from the stars, guarding a secret treasure hidden beneath the pavement. Others claimed she was a warning, a sign that humanity had broken a bond with another world, and she waited only to remind them of the promise that had been betrayed. Some feared her presence. They walked the long way around the block, avoiding the corner entirely. They whispered that if you met her glowing eyes, you would dream of endless waiting, that you too would become trapped by promises unfulfilled. Yet others sought her out, purposely curious to feel the weight of her gaze, to see if she truly was otherworldly. A few swore that when she looked at them they felt both small and infinite, as if she could see not who they were but who they might become. The bakery owner, who had watched her from the start, grew tired of the constant questions from customers. He told them she was nothing but a foolish girl waiting for a foolish love. Yet even as he said it, he found himself glancing at her corner every morning, wondering why he felt a chill. When he saw her standing unchanged, he wanted to believe she was foolish, but some part of him feared she was wiser than all of them. Teenagers dared each other to approach her at night, when the street was quiet and shadows stretched across the ground. Some tried to taunt her, to break her stillness, to prove she was just a girl, but she never reacted, and their laughter always faded into uneasy silence. Others tried to ask her questions, hoping she might tell them something about the stars or about her world, yet her only reply remained the same: "I wait for the one who promised to return." And each time she said it, the weight of her words sank into them, leaving them unable to argue. In time, travelers from other districts came to see her, as if she were a landmark. Guides pointed her out to newcomers and told them, "This is the girl of devotion. She has been waiting here through storm and sun for a human who may never come." Some people bowed to her as though she was sacred. Others offered flowers at her feet, which she never touched, but never removed either. The flowers simply withered where they lay until the wind carried them away. The whispers shaped her into something larger than life, a symbol that belonged not only to the corner but to the city itself. Her silence became a story, her stillness became a myth, and her presence transformed into something neither fully human nor fully alien, but eternal. Merchants began leaving her food. Children drew pictures of her teachers, told stories about promises that should never be broken. The alien girl became more than a mystery. She became a lesson. Families pointed her out to their children and said, "See, that is what it means to keep faith, even when the world does not believe." Some children listened with awe, while others only giggled, but all of them remembered the strange girl with glowing eyes who never left her corner. One day, a small boy left a drawing at her feet. It showed Two figures holding hands under a glowing star. One figure was human, the other clearly alien with big bright eyes. She bent down slowly and touched the paper with her fingertips, her first clear reaction. In many months the boy gasped and ran home to tell everyone that she had acknowledged his gift. Soon other children followed, leaving flowers, drawings, small toys, and handwritten notes at her feet. The corner became a shrine of devotion, not only her devotion to the human she waited for, but the devotion of strangers to the story. She represented teachers and classrooms, began using her story to explain promises. They told their students that a promise is a thread, invisible yet strong, and if broken it phrased the heart of both who gave it and who received it. And when children asked if promises should always be kept, the teachers pointed toward the corner where the alien girl still waited without complaint. The alien girl never spoke to the crowds, yet her presence alone seemed to speak louder than words. When children asked her if she was tired, she simply shook her head. When a teenager asked if she was angry, she shook her head again. When an old woman asked if she was sad, she shook her head a third time. Her answers were always the same. She was not tired, not angry, not sad. She was only waiting. In time, parents began telling bedtime stories about her. They told their children that somewhere in the city stood a girl from the stars, waiting through rain and fire and wind because she believed in love and in promises. They said that belief was stronger than any storm, and that one day she might be rewarded, though they themselves were not sure if the human would ever return. Merchants found her presence began to affect their businesses. Some noticed more customers, drawn by curiosity to see her corner, while others complained that whispers of her story distracted from daily life. Still, no one could deny that the alien girl had become woven into the fabric of their days. Her stillness shaped their routines, her silence shaped their thoughts. Even strangers passing through the city for the first time found themselves slowing their steps when they saw her. It was impossible to ignore her figure by the lamppost, her posture unchanging, her eyes glowing faintly against the noise and chaos of the world. Children pulled on their parents' arms, asking for the story, and parents who had never seen her before invented versions on the spot because even without knowing her truth they felt the power of her presence. The alien girl did not ask for this attention. She did not turn to thank the children, or the merchants, or the families who spoke of her. She remained locked to the corner as if tethered by invisible roots, yet in her silence she gave more than she realized. She gave a city hope, and she gave children an example of devotion so rare it felt almost holy. Days became months, months became years. 500 nights passed, and still she waited, her clothes torn, her form weary, yet her eyes burning with hope. Her figure no longer looked as untouched as it once did. Her garments faded from the colors they once held, her shoes worn thin from standing upon the same piece of pavement. Yet despite the wear, her posture did not bend. She was as tall and steady as she had been on the first day. The people who saw her daily began to mark their own time by her presence. A woman who had been pregnant when she first noticed the alien girl now carried a child by her hand, and when that child looked at the glowing figure on the corner, the mother whispered, "She has been waiting longer than you have been alive." Another man, who once was a student, had grown into a teacher, and when his students asked about patience, he pointed out the window and said, "Look, there is the truest example you will ever find her." Silence became a clock. Each season passed across her shoulders like pages in an endless book. Summer burned upon her skin, autumn leaves swirled around her feet, winter snow pressed upon her figure, and spring flowers grew in the cracks of the pavement near her ankles, and she accepted all of it without a word, as though nature itself was part of her waiting. The strain of time showed in her body but not in her eyes. Her hair tangled with the wind, her clothes ragged and worn, yet her gaze remained bright, glowing like twin stars that could not fade. It was as if her very spirit drew strength not from food or rest but from the promise she held inside her chest. Some people began to feel ashamed when they looked at her, ashamed for the promises they themselves had broken, for the words they had once spoken lightly but never fulfilled. They avoided her gaze because, in her devotion, they saw their own weakness, yet others found strength in her example. They kept promises more carefully. They spoke truth more gently. They treated each vow as if it mattered because they remembered the alien girl who stood at the corner believing in only one vow. Her legend grew until it reached beyond the city newspapers. Printed sketches of her poets wrote verses inspired by her vigil. Songs were sung in distant towns about the girl who waited for 500 days. Her name was never spoken because no one knew it, but everyone knew her story. It had become more enduring than stone, more lasting than steel. Night under the stars she seemed less like a lonely girl and more like a sentinel of faith standing between two worlds, her eyes lifting sometimes toward the sky as though she could see the path the human had taken long ago, as though she could measure the distance between promise and fulfillment with her glowing gaze. 500 days came and passed. Her body showed the weight of time, her figure weary but her spirit unbroken. She remained exactly where she had promised herself she would remain, on the very corner where hope first bloomed. The human never returned, but the people began to see her as more than a stranger. She had become a symbol of devotion. They whispered about her in their homes. They told her story to travelers. They pointed to her corner as if it were sacred ground. Children who once played nearby now brought their own children to witness the girl who had not moved for so long, and each generation added new layers to her legend. City began to change around her. Buildings rose higher, lights grew brighter, streets became busier, yet she never shifted, even as construction rattled the pavement at her feet. Even as new signs and shops appeared around her, she was constant, her presence older than the stones themselves. Some began to believe she would outlast the city, that she would stand there long after the walls crumbled and the people vanished. Artists painted murals of her across walls, capturing her glowing eyes, and still figure writers penned novels inspired by her patience. Musicians played songs in the square nearby, singing of waiting and hope and love that endured beyond reason. She never asked for these tributes. She never turned to acknowledge them, but her silence only deepened the reverence the city held for her. A man once knelt before her corner, placing flowers at her feet. He whispered that he had broken a promise to someone he loved, and he wanted forgiveness. He asked her to bless him. Though she said nothing, her eyes glowed in the light of the street lamp, and he wept, believing he had received an answer. Another woman came every week, leaving candles in a small circle around her, believing that the alien girls waiting protected her family from misfortune. Soon, her corner became a gathering place for those burdened by their own promises, broken or kept. Lovers met there and pledged vows before her figure. Families swore to stay together in her silent presence. Friends promised never to betray one another beneath her watchful gaze. The corner transformed from an ordinary street into a sanctuary of promises, where people sought the strength to remain true. Officials debated whether she should be removed. They claimed she disrupted traffic and distracted citizens, but every attempt to discuss her removal was drowned by protests. The people demanded she stay, for they no longer saw her as foreign or strange. They saw her as the heart of the city, the living proof that devotion could endure beyond measure. And so she stood unmoved while the city around her pulsed with life and change and ambition. She stood as an anchor, reminding all who passed that some things were stronger than progress, stronger than failure, stronger than time itself. Her figure ragged, her body weary, but her eyes glowing with the same fire as the day she first began to wait. She was no longer only the alien girl waiting for one human. She had become the symbol of devotion for all humanity. The quiet voice, reminding them of promises too sacred to be forgotten. Her silence became their conscience. Her waiting became their prayer. On the 500th night, she looked up at the stars, whispered farewell, and finally walked away, leaving behind a story of waiting that no one would forget. The city did not realize at first that she had gone, for they were so used to her presence that her stillness had become invisible, like the lamppost beside her. But when morning came and the corner stood empty, the absence was louder than any sound. The bakery owner, who had watched her for years, was the first to notice. He looked out his shop window, expecting to see her slender figure, but instead the space was bare. He dropped the tray in his hands and ran into the streets, staring at the pavement as if she might reappear. The marks of her presence were faint scratches on the wall where she had counted days, a faint glow lingering in the cracks of the ground. But the girl herself was gone. Word spread quickly. The alien girl has left. The alien girl has vanished. Some refused to believe it. They searched the streets, thinking she had moved to another corner, but she was nowhere to be found. People wept, as if they had lost a relative. Others stood in silence at the corner, feeling the weight of her absence more than the comfort of her presence. The boy, who had once given her a drawing, now older and taller, returned to the corner, holding another drawing in his hands. He placed it gently on the ground. It showed the alien girl walking into the stars above. He whispered, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for teaching me to keep my word." And then he left with tears in his eyes. The corner became a shrine, not of her waiting, but of her memory. Flowers piled higher than ever, candles burned through the night. Strangers wrote notes of gratitude and tied them to the lamppost. People from distant towns traveled to see the place where she had stood, and they carried the story back with them, spreading her legend far beyond the city. No one knew where she had gone, some said. She had finally returned to the stars. Others believed the human had come back quietly, and she had left with him. Still others claimed she simply dissolved into light, her purpose complete, her devotion fulfilled. But no one could be certain because she had left no answer, only the silence of her absence. The city felt different without her. Yet in another way she was more present than ever. Her story lived in every promise spoken between lovers, in every vow whispered between friends, in every word of devotion that parents taught their children. She had become eternal, not through her body but through the example she left behind. On clear nights people still gathered at the corner, looking up at the stars as she once had. They whispered their own promises into the night, believing she might hear them wherever she had gone, and in their hearts they carried the truth that one alien girl had stood for 500 days, waiting for a human who promised to return, and in her waiting, she had given them a gift more powerful than return itself. She had given them the meaning of devotion,